Before I direct my questions to the panel, perhaps as the oversight chair, as I put them out there, you can direct it to the appropriate person. I was able to listen in and establish that BBMR is the body that allows control to funds, and then I also heard that DOA is the entity that spends that money and cuts the purchase order. But my question, Mr. Chairman, which I think is fundamental to this whole process, is more along the lines of economic outlook. I'm still trying to reconcile. I heard this about what we know and what we don't know. I also heard that we use past projections. But what I also heard was consternation by members of this body that given the economic realities of the CRER from March to current, that this is not the same thing we're dealing with. And I'm not an economist, I'm certainly not a banker or a business analyst, but I'm a realist. And what I brought today, which I brought yesterday, were the experiences of the past, of the Tax Cuts Jobs Act to the tune of $68 million, which at the time we knew the fiscal team was able to project at the time a potential loss of anywhere from $60 to $80 million. And then we put our heads together with the administration and this body, your predecessor's team, and they were able to get pretty close. And so what they came up with, Mr. Chairman, is a bunch of revenue enhancement strategies. There was also an austerity plan. And so I'm going to put 3 questions on the table, and then I'm going to make several statements, and I hope that maybe you can guide me. Whoever the most appropriate person would be from the governor's fiscal team, do you stand by these projections, given the realities of a worldwide pandemic? And please don't answer that yet. Just start to think about that. And the reason why I asked, Mr. Chairman, is because I want to read into the public record. See, I want to make sure that we're accurate, that the public is following this discussion. Yes, this FY21 request came in pre-COVID, and I get it. But it's also important to issue a correctional statement, a statement that characterizes the future. This is not about what happened in the past. This is about where we think we're going to be as world economies are collapsing. So let me read the first sentence, and then my question again is, where do you stand? And could you, in a nutshell, for the general public and for me, my simple mind, help me understand this current economic climate? And I quote, this is from the governor's summary, Economic Outlook, page 13, and I read, quote, Guam's economy is progressing toward an increasingly expansionary trajectory, continuing in its modest growth in FY21, and I'll continue forward, pivoted primarily, and these words are in this executive summary, tourism, federal expenditures, and construction capital investments. And Mr. Chairman, if that is in fact the case, and if in fact everything that we've been told is true with respect to tourism as one indicator, and forgive me, forgive this novice understanding of the budget, but I want to use 2 indicators by which I'm going to base my judgment on this budget. Okay, it's going to be on individual taxes and withholding taxes, okay? Because I'll be able to restate that into the record. That was my first question. Mr. Chairman, also, as a matter of public record, this is not my question. I just want to make sure that it doesn't go by the wayside. It's an important question. It's a follow-up that doesn't belong to me, so please just note it for the record. The question was asked, are COVID monies, relief monies, being used to subsidize government operations? And if so, to the tune of what amount and where? I think the request was made yesterday and the assurance was given on record that we would have it by the end of the business day yesterday. Forgive me, I didn't check my email this morning, but I checked yesterday evening and it was not there. But Mr. Chairman, it's important because the 824 compared to the 775 or the $49 million reduction you're proposing, I can appreciate that. But that's 5% of the original submission. That's not even 10% at the TCJA in 2018 when we were discussing this. You're telling me what I read from that in my very simple understanding is that this global phenomena that's affecting us, particularly Asian markets, we're not guessing. That's not an unknown. That is a fact, okay? It's been submitted by GVB that the inbound tourism is cut by, on average, 90%. Okay, let's be positive. Maybe 80%. There was a 78 in March, and it went 90 and 90, 90. And so my point would be, if you're cutting that third leg of this economy, and all around you, restaurants are closing, and 32,748 people are unemployed, and your CRER is reflecting that we're not collecting. Oh, there are a couple of anomalies, and I think that's what, I can appreciate Mr. Carlson, because at least he'll give me the facts, but he's not an economist, right? He spoke to the anomalies in June of a plus 25 million. That's a wash from April, because the normal date is in April, right? I get it. And then thank you also to you, Mr. Byrne, for helping me understand how there was a spike in individual income taxes. Again, I don't have a sophisticated understanding of the budget, so maybe anybody here can help me. But aside from individual taxes for the month of June, we were trending at minus dollars. It's important to note, and March, April, May, June, July, with no end in sight to 2023, at least for GVB, right? That you're telling me that we're going to be at par, if not better, given all the financial indicators. I don't even understand that. TCJA was 10%. We cut that. Governor Calvo came forward, and it was a vicious battle. It was painstaking. Yet to date, with the collapse of world economies and Asian inbound tourism to this island that we depend on, you're not cutting this budget by even that much? Let me proceed. So again, for the record, I would really like to see the bifurcation or the non-commingling of COVID monies with operations. I get it, we need to. My heart is with customs and quarantine. My father retired from there. But let's be real. No custom user fees, no money for paychecks. So the question becomes, how are we doing that? And again, Mr. Chairman, let me be the first to self-deprecate, to say how I fall short of meeting the standard of doing my due diligence. I did not see the transfer in report as to how we're subsidizing that operation. But let me go on, because that's not my question. I'm putting it on the table for the listening audience so we can formulate our thought process and where we stand. Because if you ask me to vote today, even on your 775, it's no. And on 824, it's an absolute no. I'm sure we can characterize it in other terms. My second question, Mr. Chairman, this is the one I'd like to ask. It's a two-part question, right? Because it's along the line of fiscal responsibility. Please don't answer this yet. I'll come back to it, so I want to be able to put this on the table for you to digest. Back then, we had a fiscal realignment plan that included multiple revenue-generating options. Now, I think we're revenue-generated out. I mean, there's no way to squeeze water from a rock. But the point is, we were looking at ways to stimulate the economy. So as part of a financial plan perspective, do we have, as part of this financial planning purview of the executive branch, or perhaps even our colleagues here, a austerity plan and or a economic revenue generation plan? Now, I'm not talking about taxes. I'm talking about, are we going to go to the federal government? What are we going to do to put us back on our feet? Right? At least there's a plan. That would be my second question. My third and final question, again, it's along the current fiscal state of the territory. Mr. Chairman, my uninformed perspective is that we are in a very dire state of fiscal fragility. We are on thin ice, maybe not today, because you got the stimulus, and maybe there's a stimulus in sight. I'm talking about the mid to long-term recovery of the territory. And so my question along that line is to anybody on the panel, and this is my third, it's a two-part question. Are we in a fiscal crisis? Are we in a cash crisis? Mr. Chairman, I just want to read some facts into the record, and then I'll relinquish the balance of my time to my colleagues. Correct me if I'm wrong, after I'm done being totally wrong, assuming I'm wrong. I'm looking at the CRERs for March, April, May, and June. And I was able to pull down, for the public record, the individual taxes as I reported. Let me just start with withholding taxes. For March of FY19, it says we generated 22.5 million. FY20, 17.5. That's a minus 5. I don't know, 22.4 million for April, and then FY20, 18.8 million. May, 20.2 million for FY19. May, FY20, 15.9. So it's negative 5, negative 3.7, negative 4.3, with the exception of June, which was a positive of 8.7. And I guess Mr. Burns' reasoning makes perfect sense to me, because that stimulus infusion of money into the economy was compounded over, I guess, the affected period of time. That makes sense to me. But I want to qualify that. I want to put an asterisk by that, because stimulus monies, Mr. Chairman, do not completely subsidize the lost income of that individual. As a matter of fact, if my math is correct, and almost always my math is wrong, if you took the $180 million and divided that by 32,723, I mean, just across the board math, you're at a fraction of what they made. So logic would dictate that if you paid me even 50% of my total pay, assuming that to be true, that you should expect 50% less of income and or withholding taxes. Now, maybe again, I don't understand that. But what I want to get on the record is the summative statement from anybody in the administration about the current state of the economy for FY21. I'm sure, by the way, forgive me, I mispronounce these. These are nice words. Are we still progressing toward an increasingly expansionary trajectory, modest growth? So somebody please restate that if in fact the situation has changed, and one only need to look outside and realize that it's never going to be the same, and it's going to be a while before it gets back to a sense of normalcy.
Senator Castro, your first question was to restate what we're not entertaining?
I'm sorry, are we on the FY21 budget?
Yes.
Okay, then I'm in the right room, Mr. Chairman. We're entertaining the budget. I want a macro perspective on the state of economy that is accompanying this adjusted budget submission. Please, help me frame it. And by the way, yes, it's one round, Mr. Chairman, but this is the most important discussion about the budget, because it's upon these suppositions that we traject forward, given the realities of what's happening. I'm not talking about the last 2 years, I'm talking about March to now. So to me, para Guåhan, este no mas preciso na tempo pago na para deskuti hafa pun mamala por este na budget.
Okay.
And I didn't mean that at you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just putting that on the record, because you've known me over the years. Unless there's a stake to be planted for a point to be made, I usually just fall in line and listen, because it makes sense. But right now, it's not making any sense. Help me understand this. Please allow me to restate for the record, and this time a June statement by the same source, that they were projecting in January of 2020 a 3% growth. World GDP, I would presume that's what that is. Mr. Burns, I don't know. And then they came back and reissued a statement, I think in March, that it was contracting, that they anticipate the rest of 2020 to contract at 3%. And in their words and not mine, that would equate to the IMF saying it is, quote, the worst recession since the 1930s. I don't necessarily agree that we're not in a crisis. I'm sure that 33,000 unemployed people out there have a difference of opinion. And we're talking about the government. Maybe, perhaps, the government's able to stabilize. I'm talking about the effect upon the community outside of the government. I'm not trying to contradict or debate you, Mr. Carlson. I'm just looking at my good chairman here to make a point for the record. And I was asking for a restatement, but I'll go ahead and accept that there isn't a revised statement to this increasingly expansionary trajectory based on revised amounts. And no, I'm still a firm no, even at the adjusted amount, given the current financial indicators that I'm looking at. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.